Today, we're digging into one of the most unbelievable stories in history. It's a true story about a British trading company, a company that was so obsessed with profit, it ended up conquering the entire Indian subcontinent. I mean, really think about that. How does a for-profit corporation with shareholders and a bottom line actually conquer an entire country? This isn't some fantasy story, it really happened. They started out just wanting to trade spices and textiles, but they ended up with an army, fighting wars, and becoming a full-blown imperial power. So how on earth did they manage to pull that off? You see, the key thing to get is that the East India Company didn't show up in India with some grand master plan for conquest. Not at all. They were just traders. But what they figured out really, really fast was that to protect their profits, to secure their trade routes, and to beat their rivals, just having money wasn't enough. They needed real, actual political power. And of course, an army to make sure everyone listened. And the place where they first put this new strategy to the test, the place that became their model for everything that followed, was the incredibly wealthy province of Bengal. What went down here became the blueprint for their entire empire. So you can see the problem right here. It was a total clash of interests. On one side, you have the local ruler, the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-daulah. All he wanted was to be the boss in his own land and have the company pay taxes just like everybody else. But on the other side, you've got the company, looking at those taxes and rules and seeing them as nothing but obstacles to their profits. Their goals were just completely at odds. A collision was pretty much inevitable. So how did this tension finally explode? Well, it was a step-by-step escalation. First, it was about the money. The Nawab hit them with heavy taxes. Then it got military. The company started building up its fort in Calcutta without asking for permission. And then came the final killer move, a political conspiracy. The company's guy on the ground, Robert Clive, cut a secret deal with the Nawab's own top general. And that's why the famous Battle of Plassey, well, it wasn't really a battle at all. It was more like a fixed match. The Nawab's commander, Mir Jafar, who was on the deal, just held most of his army back. He didn't even fight. Siraj-ud-daulah was defeated in a flash, and the company put their own guy, Mir Jafar, on the throne as a puppet ruler. Now, if Plassey was the sneaky political win, the Battle of Buxar, which happened a few years later, was the real military knockout punch. The new Nawab tried to push back and get some real independence, but the company's army just completely crushed him and his allies. After Buxar, that was it. There was no more doubt about who was really in charge. And this right here, this was the ultimate prize. After winning on the battlefield, the company went to the Mughal emperor himself and basically forced him to grant them the Diwani of Bengal. This wasn't just some trade agreement. This was the moment a private company was officially given the power of a government. So what in the world is the Diwani? Simple. It's the right to collect all the taxes and run the courts. For a company, this was the absolute jackpot. Suddenly, they controlled the entire treasury of India's richest province. They had a ton of money to fund their armies and expand even more, and the best part? They could leave all the boring, messy parts of actually governing to someone else. Okay, so now the company has Bengal's money and military might. They have a winning formula. It was time to take this show on the road. They developed a whole toolkit of strategies to expand across the rest of India. And they basically had a two-part playbook. On one hand, you had brute force. They just went to war with any Indian kingdom that was big enough to be a threat. But on the other hand, they used some really clever and pretty sneaky diplomacy to take over states without even having to fire a shot. The military part was relentless. They just systematically took on the biggest powers in India, one by one. The Anglo-Mysore Wars in the south, the Anglo-Maratha Wars in the west, these were long, tough fights that ended with the company's biggest rivals completely dismantled. But fighting wars is expensive, right? So they had a much cheaper method, the Subsidiary Alliance. This thing was a diplomatic trap, pure and simple. The company would go to an Indian ruler and offer them protection with British troops, but the price for that protection was basically the ruler's independence. And just look at these terms. It's crazy. The ruler had to pay for the very army that was occupying his kingdom. Then a British official, called the resident, moves into the palace basically to watch over everything. The ruler couldn't hire any other Europeans, and he couldn't even talk to other Indian states without British permission. I mean, they were effectively prisoners in their own homes. And the guy who really perfected this whole scheme was this man, Governor General Lord Wellesley. He saw it as the perfect, low-cost way to make the company the top dog in India, just gobbling up states without the hassle and expense of a full-blown war every single time.
So once they took control of a territory, either by fighting for it or through one of these alliances, what did they do next? How did they actually manage everything? Well, that brings us to the systems they created to make sure the money kept flowing.
Back in Bengal, they came up with this brilliant little system called dual government. And I mean, brilliant from their perspective, of course. It was designed to get them the most profit with the least amount of work. The company took the two things it cared about: the money, the Diwani, and the army, the Nizamat. Everything else, justice, welfare, all that messy stuff, they just left that to the puppet Nawab to deal with. And for the actual people of Bengal, the result was a complete disaster. The company had all the power but zero responsibility. Their only goal was to squeeze every last rupee of tax revenue out of the land. Meanwhile, the poor Nawab had all the responsibility for his people's well-being, but he had no money and no authority to do anything about it. The whole system was built for exploitation, and boy, did it work. All right, let's step back and look at the big picture here. By the middle of the 1800s, the East India Company had done it. They had transformed from a group of merchants into the absolute rulers of India. So here's their whole playbook in a nutshell. They used war when they had to. They used the Subsidiary Alliance to take over peacefully. They used clever legal excuses, like the doctrine of lapse, to just grab any kingdom where the ruler died without a son. And if all that failed, they could just say a ruler was doing a bad job and annex their kingdom anyway. They had a tool for every possible situation. But the most incredible part of all of this? The timeline. From that first major victory at Plassey in 1757 to controlling almost the entire subcontinent by 1857, it took them only 100 years. A private company built an entire empire in just a century. It's staggering. What the East India Company created was something the world had never really seen before: a corporate state. This was an empire run not for God or for national glory, but for the quarterly earnings report. Every single decision, every war, every treaty was driven by one simple question: is this good for business? Is this good for the bottom line? And that really leaves us with one final, very important question to think about. The story of the East India Company might be history, but the idea behind it is alive and well. It really makes you ask, what happens when the line between a corporation's interests and a country's power starts to blur? What happens when a company's bottom line becomes a nation's foreign policy?